Hello everyone. So today I'll be sharing on how to achieve the deeper learning, how to help your children to ensure that learning is deeper, making your teaching more efficient. I started on that in the last video, and I spoke about the learning styles, the learning domains, making sure that your work content appeals to children, to the different learning styles the child might have, or a class, the different learning styles that might be present in a class, as the case may be if you're teaching in a classroom environment, and also making sure that your work appeals to the three learning domains of a child. That is cognitive element, there's an affective element, and there's a psychomotor element, something that ensures that all their faculties are involved in the learning, all the faculties, all the domains benefit from the experience, and all of this together would ensure that the teaching is deeper and the child retains more. So when I started last week, I talked about the learning styles, and I'm going to show you this matrix. So it's really like a worksheet for teachers. It's a kind of guide that helps in developing content. I will actually walk through one of it by trying to develop one on the go now, so that you really see how it goes. Over time, when you become very, very adept at using this approach, you may not need to use a matrix, because you just know the trigger points and make sure that your content has all the elements that is necessary for a full class and a good learning experience. But for new people who are just being new teachers, or mothers or tutors that are just being introduced into this method of teaching, I typically advise that they use this worksheet. It helps to collate the thoughts and ensure that nothing is neglected. So let's go on to work with the sheets and see how it goes on. Okay. As I said in my last video on ways to help your children achieve deeper learning and make your own teaching more efficient, all content has to have the different elements that is directed at the different learning styles. And in order to make it easier to implement, so that the teacher keeps all these things in focus, because most times it's not easy for you to remember all the elements that you want your lesson content to have or your children's activities. So we have this kind of matrix. You can see the learning styles on the column, and then we have the learning domain on the rows, so that by the time your activities appeal, you plug in activities in all of these boxes, you would have been able to effectively develop a content that takes cognizance of all these elements. So on this side, we have the visual elements, auditory elements, and the tactile elements. And like I say, what a teacher needs to keep in mind, or a parent or a tutor, is see it, say it, sign it. Now for the signing it, we have both the touch and just the movement. It includes a touch element and sometimes a movement for the child. You know, I said the tactile and kinesthetic styles of learning are intertwined. Secondly is the domains, and this is where you define your learning objectives. You want something cognitive, you want a cognitive objective, you want an affective objective. A cognitive objective is one that affects the way their knowledge base, what they know, what they can list, what they can recite. The affective domain is what affects their behavior, the kind of attitudes they would exhibit. And the psychomotor domain has to do with what they can do. And the keywords we use to keep that also in mind is strong hands, sound mind, and right spirit. So in developing your content as a tutor with my school, or as somebody that I'm working with, if you're a homeschooling parent, I tell you, you must make sure that there's something to build their physical strengths. Strong hands, strong arms, strong body. There must be a right spirit element, something positive, a positive behavioral impact, and then there must be a cognitive challenge in your activities. Looking at this, which is already done, you can see this is A. And what are the visual activities they would see? They have the worksheets, they have the flashcards. And then you have different activities. Let me try to build one as I speak right now so that you can follow. What's the topic? Let's say we are teaching. No, we're still talking about the labella read series, so I'll just use something to do with reading. And then age, let's say age 3 to 4 or 2 to 4, whatever, depending on your class approach. So what are the cognitive activities you want to achieve here? You want the child to be able to identify the symbol. So in order to identify, that's a sound mind, identify symbol F. It needs to be able to say the sound. So we are talking about what it says and what it hears too, which is the auditory element. So you're talking about association and then vocalization. And then you have the tactile element. What activities am I going to introduce to help this child to actually experience this lesson? So with this, you begin to think, for this child to identify, I probably want to introduce flashcards. I want to introduce ID, that's identification worksheets. And this is still under the cognitive domain. For the auditory element, I may decide to introduce a rhyme. A rhyme that is rich in the sound F. Or if I am using an association, let's say f as in finger or f as in fish, then I might put in a rhyme about a fish. That's the way to make sure that you reinforce that lesson. And then finally, I'm talking about the tactile elements. Maybe I want them to make a Play-Doh and use it to mold letter F, or just to put dimples on it, or to connect. Yes, there's this other activity we do, which is a very beautiful and simple activity, especially for those who are not writing yet. So you just say connect the letters, connect the symbols. So they really don't need to, they don't even need to write. They use strips of paper to connect the different elements. I guess I'll give you a demonstration of that later. Then you now go on to the affective domain. Now what we're actually teaching is, so what's the affective domain here? They should be able to say it, which we have said it. But like I said, we do what we call the whole brain learning. And the whole essence is to harmonize teaching. Bring activities from both the right side and the left side of the brain. And in doing that, we usually try to blur the line. So we bring in activities from other things. If I'm going to be using fish, for instance, to teach them the auditory elements, then I might go into my affective domain and teach about, let's say CRS, and teach about the 5 lobes. And 2 fishes. That's a story in the Bible about how Jesus fed the 5,000. So you can even see feeding of the 5,000. You can see how many times I'm already repeating F in these activities. 5 loaves, fish, feeding 5,000. So this is just like a rough sketch that the teacher would actually go back on to work on. Then the affective domain. In discussing this, definitely you'll be having something that affects the behavior. So you have already achieved an affective objective. You are teaching morals, you are teaching faith, you are teaching generosity through that story. Then we go on to psychomotor activities. Is there something I want them to do? You can decide to make a crafts activity. Maybe a cutout of fish, or using fish scales to do something. That's a fish craft. How do I bring another cross learning here? I can also decide to bring in addition and subtraction. Since the story has to do with numbers, So if somebody had 10 loaves of bread and gave out 4 loaves of bread, how many loaves would you have left? Remember that you have to work on your content for all your subjects in this same manner. But the point is making sure that you don't neglect anything. The tendency, the likelihood when you're working is teachers will just develop an activity that appeals to maybe 1 or 2 learning styles and ignore the last one. So they may just introduce flashcards and tell the children to write, and that would be the end of that class. Or the tendency to focus on the cognitive content. So children are really knowledgeable, but the material is not presented in a way that it affects their behavior. I also told you that our pre-reading activities also talks about sex education, preservation, and which is an affective content which is very strong at the preschool level based on what obtains in my own local community in Nigeria currently. So definitely we will be talking about parts of the body. So which parts of the body starts with F? Again, so you are talking about your finger, your feet, your femur. It depends on what you have taught the children, now the level of learning that have preceded this. But based on this, we have taught them songs, we have taught them rhymes about self-preservation, so they know that anything under their garment is a private part. Nobody should touch it. And anything outside of the garment, these are the things they can do with it. So you're talking about their fingers. What can you do with your fingers? You can touch, you can mold things, you can write, you can hold balls. However, you can also touch your friend's body. You should not touch anything under their garments. So if anyone wants you to touch a part of their body that is under their garments, you must say no and you must report to a trusted elder. So even in still teaching F, you can see that there are 2 affective elements, content, so to say, that has been brought into this teaching. I hope this is clear enough. In the next video, I will move on to other elements of harmonizing the left and the right brain content, making sure your content crosses the bridge so that the children have deeper thinking skills. So I see you next time. Bye.